Okay, some of you mentioned that perhaps you'd like a video to go over the steps of connecting your front end to your service backend and deploying it and kind of seeing what's going on. So we're going to do that real quick, and we're going to start up with this Simon service. So if you want to go on your schedule, find the Simon service, and it's going to have a bunch of description of what's going on. And I would encourage you to look at that, particularly the parts which talk about how to use curl to actually test your backend. And that's going to be really important to you. But someplace down here near the bottom, we're going to find that we have a GitHub repo. And I would suggest you take a look at this. Might be a good place to start for your startup. But we're going to go ahead and look at this and figure out how to actually add things there. So let's see, I'm going to go up to create a directory and go into there. And then I'm going to do this clone and grab the Simon code. And then I'm going to go there and do an npm install. And this is going to install everything for the front end. And so you'll notice that now we've got this node_modules directory. And then, so I'm going to kind of use one window to take care of the front end. And then on this other end, I'm going to go to the same place, except I'm going to go into the backend, which is in the service directory. So here I'm going to also do an npm install. And at this point, I've got both the front end and the back end ready to go. So I can do an npm run dev in the front end. And again, this is going to use Vite to provide a web server on port 5173. And then on the back end, I'm going to do a node on this index.js, which is the back end, okay? And it's going to run that on port 3000. So what will happen is I'm going to open up a browser and look at the front end. It's going to access the APIs on the back end on port 3000. And so this is going to be kind of your debugging environment. And if I wanted to, I could look at this 5173 localhost 5173, and that should go ahead and open up the default Simon thing. And so if I was to, look at this, I can log in and create a user, and then you see the additional things up here. And you'll notice here's the scores, and and so here we are. The next piece is let's open up our Visual VS Code, and I'm going to also go to that same place, which is in my in this record directory, and I'm going to open that, and then we can start looking around here. So again, this is just the default thing that came in that Simon service. And so a couple things to note here are that everything in the service directory then is the back end. So this index.js, you'll notice, uses Express, and it has a users object and a scores array. And among other things, we're going to have an API. One thing that we're going to do is we're going to use this Express middleware to serve anything that's in the public directory. And then we're actually going to have a bunch of APIs. Here's a bunch of posts and deletes for logging in and logging out. And here's a get for /scores. And so the get routes are kind of cool because you can actually test them in your browser. And so here I am, here's my front end running, and here is my back end running, listening on port 3000. So I could actually test this back end by going to, again, on my local host, port 3000 /API/scores. And when I go there, notice that I got this little empty array because there's no scores in there yet. So that kind of lets you know everything's kind of working on your back end. And in fact, if I wanted to, I could go in here and let me go into this route, and I could do a console.log that says something like in scores, and then I can write that out. And anytime you change your backend, then you're going to have to kill that off with the Control-C and run it again. And notice this time when I go to my browser and go to this API scores, hit that again, you'll notice that I got a console.log that says I'm in scores. Notice this error that's coming here that says there's nothing in the public index.html file. And that's because I haven't created it yet. I haven't created that public directory. And so we'll do that a little bit later. Okay? So now everything's running and you kind of see what's going on. Let's go ahead and add a new API, and then let's add something in our front end that accesses it. And so this is are the steps you're going to take when you actually do something for your service. You know, you could just start with this Simon service and delete all of his files, put your new ones in there, and that might be a way of working on this. Let's first take a little bit of a look at, so here's the back end, and we mentioned that we have put in this middleware, this API router, so it's going to attack a /API on the front of everything. So that's why when we went to this get scores, that we just put in /scores, and the route was actually /API/scores. So just to help you kind of figure out what's going on there. So let's put in another route here and another API. And so I'm going to copy this one, and this route I'm going to call test. So it's going to be, I'm going to be able to get to it by going to /API/test. And instead of sending back this scores, I'm going to send back, I'm just going to create a and something like test data, and send back a let's see, I'm just going to make this up. Test : it's an object that has test associated with test data. Okay? So now all we have to do is just send that back. And again, for your API, your startup, this could be anything. You know, we could grab stuff from a database or whatever you wanted. And for this next assignment, you can just send back anything from your backend, and that'll be perfectly fine. I'll demonstrate you know what you're doing. And if I was to now look at this, I'm going to go ahead and save that out, and then I'm going to go ahead and kill off this backend with a Control-C, and now I'm going to run it again and test. Again, I'd encourage you to test very frequently. So I'm going to now go to this, my browser, and so /API/test, I should be able to see, oh yeah, there it is. That's that little test data thing that I just got through sending back. And you'll notice that also on my back end, I see this in test console.log. So just some little tips I'd encourage you to start playing around with. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if we can put that into our front end. Okay, so again, in service is my back end. And if I wanted to, I could go ahead and while I'm here, let's go ahead and again, we said that we want it to serve everything in the public directory. So I could go ahead and create a public directory here, and we'll be using that a little bit later when we want him to actually serve some static files. Okay, so we're through a service for a bit. Let's go to the front end, and again, here's our index.html. I'm going to go through this one more time. All he really has in him is this div with an ID of root, and then he's going to grab index.jsx. We look at index.jsx. What he's going to do is get that root element, that div, and then he's going to render app inside of that root element in the DOM. And so we can then take a look at, he's going to get app from source app. So if I go into source, then here's the app.jsx, and this is the code that's going to be run. Again, the thing that he returns is going to have the footer, a bunch of routes for place, score, and about, and then the header, the nav bar up in the top. So let's just go in here, and here's the scores. Scores is going to be rendered down here inside of my route. So he's going to render this tag. And so let's look at this scores.jsx and see if we can convince ourselves that we know how to create a new route that goes here. Okay, so you'll notice here he is. He's going to create this table and return a bunch of stuff. And so what I want to do is I want to, before this, I want to go ahead and create a button and maybe on click, I want it to run a function that I'm going to define up here. So let's go ahead and create a function. Again, here's the component, scores. So inside of here, here's a use effect. And notice that this use effect is going to call a fetch to /API/scores. That's that route on our back end. So I'm going to want to do something a lot like this. So let me just paste this down here. And now I want another function. Handle click sounds great. And I want him to call this fetch. And among other things. And I want, probably I'm going to put in a console.log. That sounds like a great thing to say. Just so that I make sure I know what's going on. And then he's going to go ahead and instead of calling /API/scores, I want him to call test. Okay? And in essence, when the response comes back, he'll convert it into JavaScript. And then, let's see, I'm going to call it testing. And let's see, I'm trying to remember what we called that. It looked like the object that came back had test in it and then test data. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that dot test and then do something with it. So to start with, again, baby steps. I'll first just go ahead and console.log it out. And then that's all I'm going to do inside of here. And then this handle click, I'm going to put in here. And then close off my button function, okay? So that's kind of handy. Now what I want to do is, let's see what happens. So I write this out, and let's see what happened. So let's just go. Here's my, notice he's been reloading it every time I changed it, the V that's serving my front end. Here's the back end, he's still okay. So now let's go to our front end. And if you remember, our front end is on port 5173. So I can go ahead and go here to port 5173. And so here we are. And now when I go into scores, and there's nothing there, which means I screwed up somehow. So if we go to inspect and go to console, we can see what the problem was. And so I always look at the first one. He says button is not defined. So I need to somehow, in the top here, import button from React Bootstrap. That's probably a good thing to do. So I write that out. And now when I come back here, there's my button that says test. Okay? So I got the console open. And so we're now going to click on test. Oh, button is clicked. And he's also going to print out what the thing that came back. I may want to print this out differently. So let's go ahead, and probably the first thing I would do when I'm creating a new API is go ahead and console.log whatever came back. So this whole testing object, I just want to show you that this console.log is really handy, because it will go ahead and show you the whole object that was returned. So you can see everything that's in there, and you can expand it and explore it. So I would lean heavily on console.log when you're setting this up. So if you notice, now when we take a look on our back end, we can see that here we are in test. When we click that button, he printed that out. Then again in our back end, which is in service, he then sent back this test data that says test:/test data. And then on our front end, he, in scores.jsx, he then printed that testing.txt test, which said test data. Okay? So we're now confident, and this is what I'd encourage you to test things out like this, just a baby step at a time. And so now that we've kind of got something, that button's working, the last piece is how do we get that to be displayed in our front end? And so maybe what I would want to do here is go down to, here's my button, and maybe underneath my button, let's put in a div, and let's see, and we will just put here, maybe we'd like some state data that we can go ahead and display. So we'll go ahead, let's go back up to, here's my scores component, and we've already got this one piece of state information. Let's put in test stuff, and then set test stuff is going to be the function to set it. And let's just start out with something like, instead of an empty array, let's put in something like starting test. And then that'll be what is displayed by default before we push the button. And then after we push the button, let's call this set test stuff function, and we'll actually change it. So here we are, here's our button, our handle click button, and along with console.logging it out, sometimes I leave my console logs in for a while or just comment them out because I may want to use them later. But here I can just call set test stuff, and I can pass it this testing.test. And so what that should do is update that div with whatever was returned from the API. Let me just look at this. So it's called test stuff, is what I just called it. So down here in the thing I return, we're gonna let's put that in. Put test stuff in there, and then let's see what happens. Okay, so now he went ahead and re-rendered that when I saved it out. See, I'm always going to be checking this page to make sure that he's not having trouble. Again, earlier he was failing to compile it when I had half of it typed in. And so now when I go here to my front, notice here's that div. It says starting test. And then when I push the test button, then he goes ahead, goes to the back end. Again, that comes back over, and then he fills in that div with the data he got from the back end. So this is the kind of stuff, if you can do this for your startup, you've certainly fulfilled the part of interacting with your back end, but it ought to have something to do with your startup app. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how this works. And you'll notice that when we actually did this, this request for the back end, we were just this function handle click. We were doing a fetch to /API/test. But how did that get to our back end, which is running on port 3000? So if you take a look at your Vite config.js, you'll notice that it has a proxy, this proxy that says, anytime you see a path /API, I want you to send it to port 3000. So that's how we got hooked up to each other. So now we've got the front end here running on this this other port, 5137, whatever it is, and we've got our back end running on port 3000. So when you deploy this, let's take a look at what deploy does. So if you look at our deploy script, what it's going to do is it's going to first do a npm run build. And that npm run build is going to compile all of your React code into just HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And then he's going to copy everything that is in that build directory oh, I'm sorry, when we do the npm run build, he's going to put it in dist, and then we're going to copy -r is recursive and f is force it, don't ask questions, into builds public. Okay, then he's going to copy the service JS in there as well. And so in essence, everything that's in that public directory is going to be the stuff that that our service serves. So if we took a look at this service, his index.js, he is going to be, we have told him that we want to use Express to statically serve everything in public. So now inside of our deploy script, we're going to copy our whole front end into this public directory. Okay? So then he's going to remove everything on your server in the services/startup directory, for example. And then he'll create the directory again, and then he's going to do an SCP, which copies it from your local machine recursively, everything in the build directory over to your server in the services/startup, for example, directory. And then he's going to go to that place, do an npm install, and then restart PM2 on that service, which will in essence it's going to just say node and then run your service. So it would say node index.js in there, okay? So that kind of lets you know what's going on. So let's see if you're having trouble with that working. We can do the same thing on your laptop. So here we are, we're sitting here. Now we're serving everything on this port 5173. And instead, what we'd really like to do is put it into the public directory on our backend and have him serve it on port 3000. Okay, so let's do that. So first of all, I'm going to kill my Vite front end here. And I'm also going to kill my backend because I'm going to start doing stuff to him. And so here on my front end, I'm going to say npm run build. And if you remember, this is all inside of my package.json file, tells me what these run things are. So here's all those scripts. We did npm run dev to run Vite. And if we say build, then he's going to say Vite build. So I'm just going to say npm run build. And what that's going to do is, notice it just compiled everything and it put it into this dist directory. And so there's a dist index.html and then a dist assets something.css, dist assets JavaScript. So now all those components and everything in React is now in those three files. And if we wanted to, we could go ahead and take a look at them. So here I am, he created this dist directory, and inside of here is index.html, and you'll notice that all he really has him in is this div with root on it, and then he's going to grab the assets CSS, and he's going to grab the assets JavaScript. And so this can now run, it's just normal JavaScript and CSS and HTML. Okay? And so if we were to take a look at the assets, again, here's that CSS, and here's the JavaScript, this is actually minified JavaScript. So he wants it to load fast, so he has a bunch of single character variable names. But this is everything that used to be in Simon's, all those components. So they were compiled all into this format. Okay, so if I wanted to then make it work, allow my backend to serve it, well, here I am. I could go ahead and copy recursively everything in dist to service. Remember, we created this directory a second ago, public, which is where he's going to service static files. So now that's copied over there. Again, if I'm now going to take a look at this, inside of my service, inside of his public directory, now is going to be that index.html, and inside the assets is going to be the index.js that he's going to actually serve. So I can now go ahead and let's bring back up my by backend here. And this time I can go ahead and say node on that index.js. And he will run it on port 3000. And now let's see what happens. So if we normally we tried testing the back end by going to port 3000 /API/test, for example. So there's our backend's API. But I can also go to, if I just go to port 3000, and remember, by default, he will go ahead and public index.html. Public index.html. So let's see, something's not right. Let's see if we can debug it. So he's saying that it's not in his place. So let's hit a Control-C here. And there is so somehow I did the copy wrong, right? So I put the whole dist directory here. What I want to do is the contents. So move dist/everything into my current directory. And now I've got the index.html. I can remove this dist directory. That wasn't too bad. And so now it should all be there. So let's go ahead and run my service again. He's now there. I now come up here, do a refresh, and yay, there's my whole Simon application. It's being served on port 3000, and this is exactly what's going to happen on your back end. And so now I can go ahead and go to the scores. There's my button. I click on this. He goes to the back end that's also running on 3000, but it's in API/test. And so then I can grab that data and put it back into that div. So now when I go ahead and do the deploy, if here I am, someplace I've got a deploy here. And so let's go ahead and run the deploy service for Simon and put it onto my my host. So bang 750. And it's going to go ahead and do the build that we did ourselves. He's going to copy everything over to the server. And then he's going to do an npm install. And then he's going to go ahead and do a pm2 restart to make it work. So now if I wanted to, I could open up a new browser window, go to simon.markclement.net, which is my place. And notice here it's all installed. When I go to scores, I've got my button. And when I click, it goes ahead and fills it in. So I hope that helps you understand what's going on. Let's see. If I was to go to my server, oops, what did I do? Thought I was doing a SSH. Looks like I was doing a deploy. So here we go. It's going to be something like this, 597. And now if I take a look around, you'll notice here I am in services. Then I'm going to go to Simon here. And notice there's the public directory. Here's all that stuff I copied over. The index.html and the assets are all sitting there. And here is index.js. That was what was in the services directory in my development environment. So hopefully that gives you an idea about how to build your startup application and how to connect it, the front end to the back end. And so hopefully that'll help you. I think you have everything you need now to do your startup application, which will be due next.